For many of us, the past 18 months have been among the hardest of our lives. The isolation, the shunning, and the sense of betrayal as our loved ones lose themselves to this mass hysteria, and as our right to think and speak freely is smothered by righteous busybodies. There's a grey, filthy fog that has descended over everything. But the human spirit does not tolerate being chained for long. It will always find new ways to carve out pockets of freedom. Sadness must give way to smiles. Isolation must give way to new beginnings. Silence must give way to the chatter of fresh voices and the uncensored laughter that renews the soul. So it's time to revive the speakeasy, updated for the digital age. In the 1920s, speakeasies reached their heyday as a way of pushing back against Prohibition-era busybodies intent on controlling individual choices. Alcohol was the forbidden fruit, and speakeasies became a cultural laboratory planting seeds for a new era of freedom that has, for the better part of a century, revolved around enjoying that forbidden fruit. Today it's free speech that's become the forbidden fruit. Today it's free speech that needs to be put in a cultural laboratory to give it fresh wings for a new century of freewheeling thought. Every darkness is followed by a fresh dawn. It starts with the smallest of flames, a Skype account, an internet connection, and the willingness to invite a stranger to come in from the dark. A whisper repeated 1,000,000 times can shake the earth to its core. Speak easy. Unburden your soul.
So I don't know if you guys have read the article by Hugh Wilborn called Cock-Up Conspiracy or Murmuration.
No.
Either of you read that? Okay, it's a wonderful article. You must really go and it's brief, so it's an easy read.
Yeah.
But in this one, he obviously is trying to say, is this just a grand mistake? Is there a conspiracy, or is this an emergent phenomenon? And he goes towards murmuration, and just for the benefit of non-bird watching listeners, a murmuration is the natural flocking of swallows and several species of birds. I think it's most impressive in swallows, where these birds fly in massive flocks that seem to be steering almost as if being led by a leader, Mm-hmm. And what turns out to be the case is that you can actually generate a murmuration in computer code with very simple principles being applied. So just 4 basic rules of how the birds need to. I think it's 3 simple rules. They've got to steer away from other birds, move in the same direction as nearby birds, and always move towards the center of nearby birds. If you program those 3, then you get a very quick simulation that looks astonishingly like a murmuration. So it's an emergent property, a complex emergence from a very simple rule set. So apologies for the long introduction to all of that, but I mean, it's a constant source of interest for me. And I sent this to a friend the other day, whose opinions I always value very highly. And he wrote back to me and he said he thinks it's a curated murmuration. And I thought about that, and I thought, yes, okay, I can go with that. But it worries me a lot that we tend to over-read design as humans. Yes. And so we will, I think, bias naturally away from emergence and towards the plan. And if I can just provide, so if we can hold 2 ideas in our head, like Kate, you say, okay, so everybody is all of a sudden on the bandwagon of the pandemic of the unvaccinated. Mm-hmm. Now, one way in which that could emerge is just a public health official somewhere gets up and has a rhetorical stroke of genius and says, we're going to have a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And that phrase gets picked up and spreads like wildfire. All these people are listening to each other. And so Fauci says it. And then Biden says it because Fauci said it. And once Biden and Fauci have said it, every leader in the world is now, doesn't want to be left out of the astonishing insight. So he's saying pandemic of the unvaccinated. That would be an emergent kind of story. And the planned story would be that somewhere in a PR agency, they worked out that they were going to use this as a marketing slogan, and they seeded it. And Fauci's on the same payroll, and he was told to use this phrase. And as soon as he'd used it, it spread. And so we've got to look at those two and say, okay, what is it? What are we dealing with here? Now, I'm in a rather strange position because my view is that if there's a plan and a conspiracy, I'm very relieved. I'm hugely relieved because that's easy to solve. You flush out the conspiracy, you find out who's been given the orders and who's been doing the plotting and planning, and then you blow the thing to smithereens and everything gets exposed, and it's a huge embarrassment for somebody, and we can all move on. But if it's not, if it's an emergent story that comes from weaknesses in our cultures or from ideologies that have taken a grip, then it's bloody difficult.
What if it's both? Yeah, what if it's both? Jinx, there you go, Julius.
Yeah. Well, let me let you get in here because I've been blabbing. You haven't had a chance for
No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, what if it's both? Like, to me, it seems like it's both. There's definitely, we know about Event 201 and, you know, we're like this meeting that took place with some of these major players, right? Like there's one of the guys, Timothy Evans, who is on this Event 201 planning table about a viral pandemic that could outbreak, you know, in the next coming years. He's actually like on the COVID-19 immunity task force, you know, led by Public Health Canada. Like these connections are so obvious, right? So yeah, there was definitely some planning done. I'm not sure for what reason. And I'm not sure either, like if it was planned, you know, that this is how we would deal something, you know, with something like this in the future, but they got so excited that they just jumped on this, you know, next one. Or was it actually planned for this time? Like, we don't know, and maybe we'll never know. But there's also definitely emergence there where these things play off. Like, you can't conduct this experiment, right? Like, without there being emerging stories and emerging factors and emerging slogans, and then things that take a life of their own. Like, you can't just make this snowball and then roll it down a hill and then be like, okay, but the snowball is going to go exactly there. It's going to land over there, and it's going to be exactly this size when it lands. Like, you have no idea where that snowball is going to go once you've launched it. And that's what I think that we're seeing. So now it has a life of its own. And yeah, I mean, that is kind of a scary thing and harder to control.
Can I link two of your ideas?
Yeah.
You mentioned that all the guidelines were thrown out in the space of a very short period of time, you know, week, 2 weeks. Everybody just threw out their pandemic respiratory virus guidelines.
Yeah.
And Event 201, they sit down and they discuss what you would do. This is how we would play it. None of them mention their guidelines in that 201. They don't go and say, you know, they're not sitting there saying, well, we need to do the following things. And then somebody puts their hand up and says, but our guidelines don't say that.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh, maybe we should go and change the guidelines. They assume that the guidelines are going to be thrown, that they almost don't acknowledge their existence.
Yeah.
And that for me is just incredible. And because what's happening there is basically a bunch of corporate people who've put the event together, private people. They aren't members of public health. The public health people are invited, but the people who've paid for and organized the event are corporate people, have assumed that governments are irrelevant. Yeah. They've assumed that they control the governments. And if they want the governments to tear up the guidelines, then they will.
Yeah, to me, that's right there. The ticket to this is that Event 201, I don't see it as a group of people planning this pandemic. It's a group of people exposing that they believe that in order to manage any kind of large crisis, that you need to have government and corporations working together, this planned economy to seize control over the situation, to have an outcome. And
censorship.
Yes, very much so.
Freedom of dissent.
Yeah. And so the way I see this is that, you know, we began following the pandemic guidelines, but we always think, well, everything was thrown out and it turned into chaos. I think that it's that you have one belief system that suddenly replaces another. And that from that moment forward, all of the people that are in public health said, you know what, you're right. We need to seize this. These guidelines, like, I mean, if you don't understand science anymore the way it's supposed to function or the principles, then why would you hang on to this? You believe that you need to, seize control, grab a hold, save the world. And so I think that that's the tipping point that happened in mid-March there sometime. But the part where you start to get into conspiracy is it doesn't even matter whether the virus was engineered or not, and whether it was released intentionally or not. What matters from there is what are the different people that are involved going to do with this wonderful opportunity, where whether it's for profit to push vaccines, or somebody wants to, do some kind of crazy social engineering experiment, or for political. And so that's where the conspiracies start to feather in on top of something else, so that there's it's not truly a planned thing like a James Bond villain with a bunch of goons that are now blackmailing our premiers and our politicians into compliance, but rather that once the belief system is there, then there's no way to stop it. And then if the folks at the top, World Health Organization, all of that, if they are either bought or have their own agenda, it's very easy to just trickle out these little droplets of fear to keep molding this in a direction that they want it to go. And that brings back to the booster shots, where there's no sane reason other than some kind of an agenda why you would be thinking about these things for a mass, like, other than if the vaccine worked perfectly as advertised, it would maybe make sense for the vulnerable, but not population wide. Yes. And yet they're ordering the doses from day one. It was always population wide, which shows that somebody had an agenda in the middle of this. Maybe the vaccine guys, maybe somebody else. I don't know.
Well, what about the vaccine passports, the digital identities? Sorry, Nick.
No, carry on.
Too. I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, I mean, we're dancing around this topic, but it's so obvious to me that from the beginning, it has been like, let's imbibe a social credit system or that kind of style. And this goes back to B.F. Skinner, who experimented on pigeons and rats. And we did a film on that, where he basically thinks that that humans are not even worth studying because they'll all act according to stimulus, and that's it. And this is basically how they see us as well. Whoever the different people are who are running this whole experiment. And I do think that the end goal is basically to have this digital identity, this social credit system. The vaccine passports are the way into that. And the vaccines and the boosters are the means to that end. And there's also, a huge, as Bill Gates had said once, it's a huge return on investment, vaccines. So there's also the financial gain, which enables these corporations to continue to charge their battery with more power through their finances. And the question is just why? Like, what is the purpose? Like, I don't understand why people would want to control all of society and to create this utopia. Like, I think that that's what it all comes down to for me. Why are there these central planning utopists who just want to create the world in their own image? Just why?
But Kate, there always are.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
There always are. And the question is, they ascend and then they descend. So 1970s UK was full of central planning. The marginal tax rate was 98%. If you added together the 80%, it was 80% from personal income tax and 18% there was this thing called an unearned income super tax or something like that then whacked you if you were earning interest, So you might find that 98% of the interest that you earned on a government bond or rent that you earned on a property was deemed unearned income. And you ended up giving 98% of it to the government. So it was a very confiscatory regime with lots of ideas of central planners to the fore. And it took, the Thatcherian revolution to basically kill that, get rid of it. And of course, the examples of Mao's China and the Soviet Union, of the one you've been talking about, the Reich and Hitler, these ideas do wax and wane. To people like us, anybody who's pursuing this line of thinking has not read their history books, and is believing in something that is certain to fail. It's certain to cause misery. It's certain to cause widespread death and destruction. We know that because we understand the mechanisms.
Right.
And we don't fall for the "this time is different" story, because it's not
like,
different. The reasons are permanent reasons. There's nothing that will change them.
Well, I
this
mean,
is like go ahead, Julius, sorry.
I was going to say that the moment that you let go of the checks and balances of individual rights, I mean, that was what the whole Nuremberg trials and United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was all about, is to create that check and balance, or that limiting force that prevents the big social engineers, the greater good guys, from taking society on a new adventure. But if society as a whole gives up on that way of thinking, it just basically attracts these utilitarian thinkers from every corner of society and unleashes them on us from all directions. And along with it is every corrupt person that can figure out how to take advantage of this. If you look at Italian fascism, which was a planned economy of a merger of big business and big government, it was known most above all for its corruption, because everybody that could get a voice into the middle of this managed to seize this for their own agenda. And some of them were, genuinely thinking that they could create some kind of, deluded utopia, and a bunch of others were trying to line their own pockets. That's kind of the model that I'm seeing here.
Okay, so what I want to know is this. Like, you guys are familiar with Lord of the Rings, and I'm sure whoever's watching this, let's hope you're familiar with Lord of the Rings. So you have this one ring to rule them all, right? But then you know that this ring cannot be wielded for good. And Gandalf says this within the first 10 minutes of the first film. Nope. You cannot use this ring for good. Like, it needs to be destroyed. And that's the only thing that you can actually do with it. Because, and I think for me, like, that ring represents so many things, but like really absolute power, central planning, all of those basic notions. And so, but yet you have, when the Fellowship of the Rings come together, you have, I think it's Faramir, who says, like, Frodo, like, let me have the ring, because I know that I can use it to lead my people to good. And there's all of these people that want to do that, right? And that's the idea of the utopist, and then there's some that really, really do believe that they can wield it for good. And then right away, he turns on Frodo as soon as he gets the first chance, because he is also intoxicated by this power. And then there's this thing that I think comes from, altruism, like the idea that, like, it's a tricky thing, altruism, because you think like you can do something to help other people, and you can and that is such a great good that you can really blind yourself on the path to evil in doing so. And that's almost worse than just being kind of a sociopath and saying, whatever, people are losers and I'm just going to take advantage of them. There's that. But there's also, I think, a lot of people in this movement and in every totalitarian movement who just actually think that somehow they are going to do something really great for humanity with this ring. And so then let me wrap this all up by saying, so Frodo, this individual, he says, all right, well, I guess I'll do it. I guess I'll take the ring and I'll throw it into that volcano and destroy it. But like, what I've never understood from Lord of the Rings is, how do you destroy it? What does that mean to destroy that ring?
I think what it means is the humbleness not to grab for power. I mean, this is, of all the American founding fathers, the one that I respect most is George Washington, because he could have turned himself into a king, and instead he threw the ring in the fire, right? He said, no, I'm not going to be a king. I'm going to be a president that goes home at the end of what you've asked me to do. And I think that's what all of society needs to grab a hold of, is the idea that you will not use the power that you are given to start controlling other people's lives, even if you think that you have the ability to do so.
But even Frodo, he wanted to keep the ring, right? Like, which is disturbing. That's a disturbing twist.
Tempting if you have the power to save somebody.
Yeah, right. But and he just, like, at that point, it was like, nah, you know what? I think I'm just gonna keep it. It's my precious. And so, what does that say about humanity? What do you think was Tolkien's message there, like, about that? And the ring gets kind of destroyed by accident in the end, right?
Well, it's interesting because it's such a it's an abiding story. You know, the Wagner's great operatic cycle, the Ring des Nibelungen, also goes around a ring that gives the wearer awesome power. So it's, you know, there's a fascination with this this kind of idea, and you know, it because I think in terms of emergence a lot. I think a lot of these stories have they're not the reasons for their evolution as stories are kind of lost. They're hard to parse. And so we must, you know, you've got Tolkien picking up the story. I can't imagine he picked it up independently of the Wagnerian cycle, which in turn didn't just manufacture this. This came from Norse mythology. So these stories have ancient precedents, much like the flood myths, you know. And I think they survive because they contain something that's ineffable. By digesting the story and contemplating it, we are asked to contemplate power and the nature of power and the corruption that comes with power so often. That's how I would answer it. I wouldn't say Tolkien meant X. Tolkien was drawing our attention to power.
Yeah, that's pretty wise words. Words.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that comes out of that is that each person that gets a hold of that ring has his own new ideas as to what he can do with it. And I think that's much like in this crisis, is that once you create the idea of a vaccine passport, once you create the idea of regular booster shots, there's all sorts of people that go, well, you know what, we could really do something really, you know, that the ideologue goes along with, I can save society in some way. We can get rid of, you know, nasty people by simply starving them into submission. We can get rid of the flu by adding that next week. And we can get rid of RSV virus by adding another boost, adding that to the booster shot next week. And so it starts to take on a life of its own, where each person that can get a hold of power can now engineer society, much like previous engineers of the past. You know. So
there are a couple of foundational memes going on that are they're very important because they enable the whole clown show.
Yes.
And the one foundational meme fascinates me. I call it pandemicity, which is the belief that the human race is going to be subjected to an increasing number of increasingly severe pandemics. And there's almost no logic underpinning this. You will hear people who are in the thrall of pandemicity refer to two things. They will say there's greater human interconnectedness, number one, and then they will also say, we come into increasing contact with animals.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the interconnectedness statement is true. The increasing contact with animals is false. But it doesn't matter, okay? So let's just look. The false part of the interconnectedness thing is this assumption that interconnectedness is a bad thing and that it spreads disease but not immunity. That's a tacit assumption going on here. And so for me, this unchallenged pandemicity construct it's astonishing how people believe that. If you say to people, oh, you know, there's this idea out there that we're going to have more pandemics and they're going to be worse and worse. People go, yeah, no, we're definitely right. That's correct. But there isn't actually a basis. In fact, my contention would be that if you really think about the science of immunity and viruses and pathogens and so on, the more interconnected we are, the less likely pandemics would be. And that's a view shared, for example, by Sunetra Gupta. And I was delighted to find that she'd actually written about it quite extensively. But that idea sits inside Bill Gates' head. He really believes that. You've seen him in the TED Talks talking about this. It's coming. There's a pandemic coming, you know. Fauci as well said similar things. But it's really just a bad meme.
It really is. I mean, when you look at, island populations, they don't have any of the immunity that comes along with having lots of mixing with other species, if it's an animal population, or with other humans when it's a human population, and so they're extremely vulnerable. That's why when Europeans landed in North America, within a generation or two, 95% of the indigenous population had died because they'd never been surrounded by those viruses and bacteria that the Europeans brought with them.
Right.
So it's actually mixing that provides us with some kind of protection or immunity. So, but I mean, the other thing that comes up from this is that if you look at these, and it reminds me of Club of Rome in the 1960s and 70s, that were obsessed with this idea that, overpopulation was going to be, the end of society. It was going to destroy us all. And they managed to actually convince India into a sterilization program in 1976, and the one-child policy in China in 1979. And yet the entire premise of that was completely bonkers, because if you actually allow people to get wealthy, they restrict their own number of children all on their own. So the whole idea that you have to take control was completely false. And yet this same idea, this controlling instinct, is still there. They're still talking about overpopulation. Bill Gates included.
They're just it's these Malthusian minds, right? Like they really just, there's this deep kind of humanicidal impulse. I think like there are really some people that have like this dark side that really hates humans, and so they think like
humans as parasites on the planet.
Exactly. And that's where I think all of this combines. And I always come back to this, and I try not to be dogmatic about it and always look at it with fresh eyes, but I really do think that the Sustainable Development Goals, now the Terra Carta, which Prince Charles has come out with, which is basically let's replace human rights, for rights to the planet. Like they're all disguises that sound really pretty, like let's live in harmony with nature, but that's not what, because if it were so, then they would be choosing technology that would be simultaneously in harmony with nature and good for humans. And that's what we've been developing on our own. They would actually like to use our life worse, right? To go backwards and to send us back into kind of like this pre-industrial revolution almost. They call it the fourth industrial revolution, but they want us to go back almost to pre-industrial times.
What if it's not a hatred of humans, but rather, or of humanity? What if it's actually just the idea that control is necessary to do a greater good, and that you have to do a little bit of evil to do a lot of good? What if it's that kind of idealism?
Yeah, that goes back to the utilitarian construct.
Yeah.
Oh, we've lost Kate.
Yeah, we've lost Kate. Uh-oh. Because
she was running out of battery, I think.
Oh, right.
Well, look, we have been going for, how long has it been?
Yeah, hour and a half.
Okay. There were so many interesting strands there, Julius. I would like to pick up on the altruism construct, because I saw a problem in that a long time before COVID, listening to philosophers like Sanger and so on, and I spotted a few problems in their thought processes, which I wish I'd said a bit more about, because they've really come to the fore now. Yeah. And then the other one is the pattern behind the thing you've just pointed to with the overpopulation and similar ideas. And the pattern is almost fabricate a problem. Actually, I'll drop the word almost. Fabricate a problem, and then insist that there's only one solution to it, which is inevitably a centralist solution. Yeah. That's the pattern. And you can chart that pattern for climate change, for overpopulation, drinking water shortages, topsoil shortages. You can go through the list. The list is evident in many places. The one is the global risk assessment of the World Economic Forum. They go and itemize all these earth-destroying or human race-destroying problems. And every time a coconut, they roll out this idea that can only be achieved by the elites at the top of government or the World Economic Forum or whatever the case may be, rolling out for the entire world a certain program.
she's back.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too that if like once you've got this system in place, it's now a question of who gets a voice in this mayhem as to what kind of engineering or social engineering projects it gets turned into, you know. I think that's where it's less important as to how it started and more important to figure out, is it now being turned into something that can be turned lethal, you know.
Just one question I wanted to ask Kate before we signed off. Kate,
Yeah.
why do you think they couldn't proceed directly to a digital ID or digital passport without a vaccine? I mean, if you want to start the program, you just, as a government, you just say, look, we're not doing printed IDs anymore. It's too expensive. We're trying to save some money. It's now going to be on your phone and much more convenient. You don't have to carry an ID book around with you if you want to, you know, do various things. So it's just going to be a little app. Everybody can download this app, and then you don't need to worry about your ID document and your driver's license and so on. I mean, would there really have been massive resistance to that idea? And then once you'd had that in place, if you wanted to add a bunch of population control dynamic things, some surveillance type things, some social credit type things, well, each of those becomes a fight. What's the obsession with the vaccine passport?
I think that it's really there to implement the system, basically as a way to put everybody on a kind of list. And again, I'll come back to that Hannah Arendt book. Like, you have to look at the way that these kind of bureaucracies are set up in any totalitarian regime. They need to have the mechanisms in place to do whatever it's going to maybe evolve into doing. And maybe they don't even know yet. Like, they maybe didn't know that the final solution for the Jewish people was what it was. But they knew that they had to kind of separate them, you know, from society, and then they had to deport them, and you know, and they ended up deporting them to gas chambers. That's what ended up happening, right? It went through, first it was like, let's get all of the Jewish people out of the country. And so I think that that's kind of what it's about, is that they know that whoever is kind of controlling this whole mechanism here, like, they know that they would like to just have that kind of control. I think, like, they want to be able to track people. And I think that there are some people who do see kind of the solution to that down the line being, we want to make sure that people's carbon footprint is reduced. And therefore, we're going to come out with this green pass, you know, a digital identity. And, you know, if you talk badly about the government, like, you might not be able to, you know, drive your car from point A to B. Or maybe even like 50 years down the line, you won't even be able to walk from A to B.
Well, I mean, they've been moving towards that passport for a long time, even in Canada before. It had nothing to do with vaccines. I think the vaccine passport is just a convenient way to accelerate that process.
Exactly, to set up that kind of system, right? So like, they don't even necessarily, maybe some people don't know what it's going to be used for, you know, but I think that at the end of the day, like, it's being set up in a way that they will be able to kind of have the possibility of tagging people, you know, like, basically putting the brand on them somehow and putting this kind of tracker on them, and then saying eventually, like, all right, well, now we'll be able to use this to track your movement, you know, and it's all these, again, these very utilitarian ideas, like, that can be used for the betterment of society. And right now, the betterment of society in a lot of ideologues' mind is less movement. Lockdowns have been so great for the planet, you know, like, we have less carbon emissions. And so that whole delusion is I think is the kind of end of the road for the thoughts of many people.
Okay, when was it that our government was trying to push that whole thing where the Revenue Canada would be able to tap into every single person's credit card payments? Wasn't it 2019 or 2018?
Yes, I think it was 2018.
Did
And I think
did that fail?
It did, but the government was quite concerned that it shouldn't be failing.
Yes, exactly. And
So what about this angle? For me, there's something striking about symbolic about the injection, forcing everybody to submit to an injection.
Yeah.
There was an illogic in aiming all these vaccines. All of them were injectables. The obvious route to go with a respiratory virus is with a nasal spray. This is not a difficult thing to see.
I was thinking about that too. Even the PCR test is an injectable somehow. It's like you have to invasively stick this Q-tip up your nose to your brain.
You don't need to be doing that. You could take a swab from inside the mouth or the front part of the nose. This is not required. And the same with the lateral flow test.
But it's a lot like
invasiveness is crucial.
Sorry. I was going to say...
saying the invasiveness seems to me to be crucial in all of these things, in the testing regime, in the vaccination regime.
It's like an initiation rite that signals an acceptance of an ideological position on life. That if you resist that, I mean, it's like, all the different initiation rites out there. It seems to function in a similar way, that once you've done that, you've accepted both to submit yourself to the government, but also to this worldview. And so now you're part of the pure group.
And I can even take it further, as I think that it's also like kind of a form of rape, it's domination, like it's penetration. Like quite literally, like this is going into your body. You don't have a choice about it. And that's like the highest act of dominance that you can really do to somebody, right? Like I've spoken to mothers who have had this happen to their newborn babies, like against the parents' will, and I've read examples, actually. I looked into that, and there were actually children who reportedly died, within hours or within days of having this done, newborn infants. And it's crazy. I mean, wow. And this is something that I actually brought up with the Ministry of Health, of Ontario, with the local hospital. I brought that up with them. And all kinds of different evidence involving, policies around newborns and maternity. And it was just shocking for me to see, like, how far society has gone. And this is on the individual level. You're talking to people here who are in public health and who are, CEOs of hospitals and who are managers and directors in hospitals, and saying, does it not bother you that the protocols that you have in place could potentially kill newborns? Even potentially, like even if that's just a coincidence, which, I don't think it is, given those examples with newborns basically bleeding out of their nose right after having this PCR test and then dying within hours. Like, do you think that what is wrong with society? What is wrong with people when they don't question what they're doing after that? And that to me shows you the level of derangement that we're at, and the level of evil. That there's no other word for that than evil. I'm sorry to go on a tangent there with that. I don't even know where I started, but
it's fine. I feel the same way about the mask mandate. I was reading a document today that was sent my way on social media, where they talk about how to habituate children to masks. You make them wear it on their chin for 10 days and then 10 days below the nose, and then eventually you'll be able to get it over their whole faces. That kind of thing.
This is horse training or dog training.
Yeah, there's something just inherently evil in even thinking that way. Let alone then voicing those thoughts and putting them down on paper as an indelible record of your thoughts. There's something that's gone bizarrely wrong. We know that the masks don't work. We know that the behavioral psychology, behavioral science teams in government were consciously using them as fear promotion tools, you know. Yeah. And so all of this stuff is out there. We can see it happening. Yeah. So any scientist who's on the bandwagon with these things is either rationalized their way into a false belief or is with the program. It believes that this is the right way to go about it, knows very well that this is about psychological manipulation, and they think that that psychological manipulation is good.
So this is where I was going to say, from the very top down, though, the fact that the autopsies were being discouraged from the WHO. I can understand why everyone lower down goes, okay, we aren't going to do this because that's just a belief system. But for them to even come up with the idea that you need to stop autopsies, because if you can go through somebody's brain and see the bleeding that's been caused by the blood clotting and all that's going on, then you have the conclusive proof to be able to dismantle this. And that's not happening. There's very few people that are doing them, and those that are being absolutely vilified. But there's an order that comes from the top to prevent that. So there's an awareness from the very top that you have to hide the evidence for this.
Yes, and that is not the banality of evil, because that's beyond just, I'm just kind of like, doing my job here. Like, this is beyond. This is, you are purposefully now. There's a purpose to this that goes beyond just your own self-interest. Like, there is a perversion there, and there's we have to do a little bit of bad to achieve a greater good. Yeah, I think it's perverted totally. I think it's gross. It's gross. This was something Nietzsche said, is that what if we were to live at the expense of the future? What kind of inverted morality would that be? Where you've basically now you've sacrificed this whole generation of children. It's sickening. We don't know what's like the bigger picture here in 20 years from now, when all of these children are adults who have been abused by their institutions, by their parents' compliance. And I know that it's hard, because I know a lot of parents who have almost no other choice. Like, they're either like, I either put my kids in school, so it's not necessarily just compliance. And but there are some who really comply, and they're, kind of go hung or hung go about it. They're with the program is what I mean to say. I don't mean to say everybody who is really backed into a corner. I think that there's still things that you can try to do, and you can't stop trying. But what is it going to be when all of these people are adults? Like, are they going to completely push back? Are they going to be a generation of people who will fight for their freedom at all costs? Or will there be a generation of completely obedient, compliant, and just like machina, kind of individuals? Or will it be kind of both? Will there be a bigger spread of traits of humanity, because of what they're doing, like a split, kind of a like basically a schizophrenia of humanity? I kind of wonder whether this is, when something is this extreme, I don't see it being sustainable, and that at some point, some spark is going to be lit that tears all of this to pieces. And whether it's, if the public suddenly realizes that, the vaccines are causing antibody enhanced dependency or whatever, or a war breaks out or something, like there's some pressure release that's going to happen, that in the same way that they've grabbed onto this stuff, they will grab onto that thing and toss out this thing that's no longer livable. I still think that's coming.
I'm with that. I'm with that. There's been a lot of tinder created, and we're in need of a spark. And I think it will come as well. The structure is just so fundamentally irrational from top to bottom. It's so full of bogusness and lies, and that it has to come apart. And the question is, how long? Yeah. I want to put a reminder in for next time. You've mentioned now antibody dependent enhancement a couple of times, ADE. We should talk about original antigenic sin, because my read is that ADE is